Hello class, this is lesson 19.3, surface area of pyramids and cones. So in this lesson, we are going to talk about how to find the surface area of a pyramid and the surface area of a cone. And we're going to look at two key equations in doing that. So first, what I want to talk about is what is the base of a regular pyramid? So a regular pyramid has the base in the shape of a polygon. So in this example, the base of this pyramid is a square. Now we could have pyramids with different shapes, and depending on what the shape is, that's going to determine the number of sides that the pyramid has. So if the base is a polygon, or if the base is a quadrilateral, meaning if the base has 4 sides, then the pyramid is going to have 4 sides. Now notice that these sides of the pyramid are actually triangles that are isosceles, meaning that these two sides are congruent for all of these triangles. And the length of those sides are called the slant height, which is the lowercase l. So the formula that we're going to be using to talk about the surface area of a regular pyramid is this one. The surface area is equal to 1/2 times the perimeter of the base. Now remember, you find that by adding all 4 sides, times the slant height, which is the slanted height from the bottom of the triangle to the top of the triangle, plus the area of the base. Now, one thing to note is that if the slant height is not given, we can find it by using the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so we're going to solve a problem in 4 steps. The first step is to find the slant height. The second step is to find the lateral area, which is that 1/2 perimeter times the slant height. Step 3 is to find the area of the base, and then step 4, calculate the total areas of all faces. Okay, so in this example, we have a pyramid with a slant height of 9, and we have a side of 5. So because this is a square pyramid, that means that this side is 5, this side is 5, and this side is 5. So there's actually a typo here. This is supposed to be 9 inches. The slant height is 9 inches. That's step 1. Next, let's find the lateral area. So we're going to use this formula, 1/2 times the perimeter of the base times the slant height. And that is why we have 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5, because of the base has 4 sides of 5, times 9, which is the slant height, and then 1/2, which ends up being 90. To find the area of the base, we multiply the length times the width, so 5 times 5 ends up being 25. So now that you have these items, the lateral area and the base, we just plug it into this formula. The surface area is equal to the lateral area plus the base, so 90 plus 25 ends up being 115. Okay, let's practice a few problems where we have regular pyramids. We are given the slant height, and we're given one side of the base. So 3 key things that we need to find out are what is the perimeter of the base, what is the slant height, and then what is the area of the base, capital B. So the perimeter of the base is 8, 8, 8, 8. So 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8, which is 32. The lateral area, I'm sorry, the slant height is 10. And the area of the base is 8 times 8, which is 64. So putting this all together in the formula, so remember the formula is S equals 1/2 the perimeter, so 32, times the slant height, which is 10, plus the area of the base, which is 64. So 1 times 32 times 10 is 320. If you divide that by 2, this is 160. Plus the 64 ends up giving you 224. Okay, next problem, we're going to do the same thing. So find the perimeter, find the slant height, and find the base. So perimeter is 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6, which ends up being 24. The slant height is 18, and the base ends up being 6 times 6, which is 36. So to find to use the formula, we're going to have S equals 1/2 times the perimeter times the height plus the base. So we're going to have 24, 18, and then 36 here. So 24 times 18 is 432, and if I take half of that, this is 216 plus 36 is 252. Okay, so we're going to go further on. We're going to find the surface area of a pyramid. Now, in some of these problems, we are not going to be given the slant height. So this is a demonstration of how to find the slant height given something called the altitude, which is the vertical height from the base to the top of the pyramid. So that remember that the altitude and the slant height are different. So the 4 steps that we're going to be using, step 1 is find the slant height if it's not given. Then find the lateral area. Then find the area of the base. And then add up all the sides. Okay, this is our example. So let me zoom in as much as I can. In this pyramid, we do not know the slant height. And what we do know is that one side of this pyramid is 10 and the altitude is 12. Now, the distance from the center of the base to the outer edge is half the distance of the entire length. So this piece has to be 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to redraw that triangle on the side. So this is the slant height. This is 5 and this is 12. I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem. So the Pythagorean theorem tells us that 12 squared plus 5 squared equals the slant height squared, which is right here. So they already did the math for us, plugged in the numbers, and they end up getting 13 for slant height. So now that you know the slant height, now you could find the perimeter of the base. So remember, to find that, you do 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10, or 4 times 10, gives us 40. The 13 is the slant height. Half of 40 times 13 ends up being 260. Then the area of the base is 100, mainly because each side is 10, so 10 times 10 is 100. So now you add up the lateral area, 260, plus the base. 260 plus 100 is 360. So step 2, 3, and 4 are very similar. The only different thing that we did was step 1, which is using the Pythagorean theorem to find a missing side. Okay, so now it is time to try a problem where we are not given the slant height. Find the surface area of a regular pyramid. So, starting with the slant height, if the bottom distance is 6, then this has to be 3. So the formula using the Pythagorean theorem is the slant height squared is equal to 8 squared plus 3 squared. Now that is 64 plus 9, which is 71. And if you take the square root of 71, we end up with 8.4. So the slant height is equal to 8.4. Okay, so I have my slant height. Now I'm going to find my perimeter. Perimeter is 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6, which is 24. And then my base, which is 6 times 6. And that is 36. So now I use my surface area formula. The surface area is equal to 1/2 of the perimeter, so 24, times the slant height, which we got 8.4, plus the base area, which is 36. Now I'm going to show you how to type all of this at once in the calculator. So if I have 1 times 24 times 8.4 divided by 2 plus 36 gives me 136.8. feet squared. Okay, we're going to be doing the same thing for problem number 2. So I'm going to go a little bit faster in that you guys should know how to find or use the Pythagorean theorem to find the slant height, and you guys should know how to find the perimeter of the base and the area of the base. So the slant height for this one is equal to the square root of 4 squared plus 3 squared, which is the square root of 25, which is 5. So my formula, the surface area is equal to 1/2. Now the perimeter of this object is 24 times 5, the slant height, plus the area of the base, which is 36. Now, half of 24 is 12, and 12 times 5 is 60, plus 36 ends up being 96. And the last example that I have is this one right here. So the slant height is equal to the square root of 13 squared plus 4 squared. Now that is the square root of 13 squared is 13, let's see, 13 times 13 is 169. 4 squared is 16. So the square root of 169 plus 16 is 13.6. That is my slant height. So now the surface area is equal to 1/2. Now the perimeter of the base is going to be 32. The slant height is 13.6. And the area of the base is 64, because 8 times 8 is 64. Typing all of this in the calculator, so we have 32 times 13.6 divided by 2 plus 64 gives me 281.6. So hopefully by me doing these examples, that kind of helps you doing it on your own, watching the steps, and just notice that the first problem, I'm showing a lot of work. I'm showing you how to find the perimeter. I'm showing you how to find the base. But as I'm doing the further problem, or the other problems, I'm doing mental math. So 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6 is 24. And I'm multiplying to find the base. Okay, so now that we have had experience with surface area of a prism, we are going to, surface area of a pyramid, we're going to find the surface area of a cone. Now a cone is related to a pyramid, except that the base of a cone is a circle, not a square. So to find the surface area of a cone, we need to know what the slant height is. We need to know what the radius is. And the formula that we're going to be using is this one here. Pi r times the slant height plus pi r squared. So if we know what the radius is and we know what the slant height is, we can solve this problem. So going straight into the first example, we should have experience finding the slant height using the Pythagorean theorem. So I'm not really going to go that much into detail of how they got 10, but just know that they squared these sides and solve for the slant height. This is a right triangle, so they use the Pythagorean theorem. After you find the slant height, you find the radius. The radius is 6. And then you plug it into the formula. So they plugged it into the lateral area, which is this part of the formula, pi RL. And they got pi times 6 times 10, which is 60 pi. Next, they found the base area, which is pi r squared. So they plugged in 6, because that's the radius, and they get 36 pi. Putting it all together, they get 60 pi plus 36 pi, which ends up being 96 pi. Okay, so now that we have seen some examples, we're going to try 2 problems on our own. And the 2 things that we are looking for are the slant height and the radius. Now, for problem number 1, they give us the slant height, which is 22, and the radius is 14. So I can find the surface area right away by using the formula pi r L plus pi r squared, and I have pi times 14 times 22 plus pi times 14 squared. We're going to leave this in terms of pi, so we don't need to worry about multiplying pi. So 14 times 22 plus 14 squared gives us 504 pi. And that is what the surface area is for that one. Now for number 2, we have to kind of break this down because they give us a diameter of 6 and the altitude of 4. So we need to find the slant height, knowing that this is going to be 3. The radius is 3. The slant height is equal to the square root of 4 squared plus 3 squared. That comes from the Pythagorean theorem, which ends up being 5. So slant height is 5. Radius is 3. So my surface area is pi RL, so pi times 3 times 5 plus pi r squared, so pi times 3 squared. This becomes 15 pi plus 9 pi, which ends up being 24 pi. Okay, now problem number 3 was already completed for you. Now there's a trick to problem number 3 in that they don't give you the radius. We actually have to find the radius. They give us the altitude and they give us the slant height. But to find the radius, we need to use Pythagorean theorem again. And they're showing you how to use Pythagorean theorem. So I'm not going to do problem number 4 with you guys, but it's the same thing. You want to find out what the radius is, and then you want to use the slant height formula. I'm sorry, the surface area of a cone formula. Okay, and lastly, to end this lesson, we need to find the surface area of composite figures. And this is just a repeat of what we did before, but now we're able to use cones with these examples. Okay, so for problem number 1, we have this image. We have a cylinder and a cone on top of a cylinder. What we need to do is we need to find the surface area of the cylinder. But we notice that we don't need the bases of the cylinder. So we have a modified equation that we use. Find the lateral area of the cylinder, so just the sides of the cylinder. Find the base of the cylinder, and then find the lateral area of the cone. So for step 2, for the cylinder, the radius is 28 and the height is 45. 28 times 45 times 2 pi is 2,520 pi. This is going to be the lateral area of the cylinder. So this actually should be L, or lateral area. Then we find the area of the base. So we have pi r squared, so pi times 28 squared, which is 784 pi. And now we focus on the cone. Because we're not worried about the base of the cone, we just use this pi RL formula. But we are not given the slant height, and that's what this math is here. So imagine you're trying to find the slant height of this object. The distance from the bottom of the cylinder to the top of the cylinder is 45, and from the top of the cylinder to the top of the cone is also 45. So you pretty much have a right triangle with sides of 45 and 28, and you find the slant height. And that is why they use this formula here, 28 squared plus 45 squared, and they end up getting 1,484. And then to put it all together, you add up all the surface areas, and you end up with 4,788 pi. Okay, so now we're going to be doing a few problems. Problem number 3, they want us to find the surface area of 2 cones on top of each other. And for problem number 4, we have a rectangular prism and a pyramid. Now I do want to mention that because for problem number 3, 2 cones are on top of each other, we do not need the bases of the cones because we're not covering those surface areas. So we're going to be using a modified formula for both. Okay, so let's start with the top cone. The formula to find the surface area of the top cone is going to be pi r times the slant height. Now, we don't have the slant height, so we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem. So we're going to have the slant height is equal to the square root of 8 squared plus 4 squared. And that ends up being 9.4. So now that we have that, I could find the surface area of the top cone as pi times 4 times 9.4. So 3.14 times 4 times 9.4 gives me 118. So I'm going to use that. But next I'm going to find the bottom cone. And to find the surface area of the bottom cone, I know my radius is 4. I need to find out what the altitude is. Now the altitude, because the distance from the top of the top cone to the bottom of the bottom cone is 13, from this point to this point, this has to be 5. And I'm using the same formula, S equals pi r slant height. The slant height for this one is going to be the square root of 5 squared plus 4 squared. So that's the square root of 25 plus 16, and that is 6.4. So the slant height is 6.4. So now my formula would be pi times 4 times 6.4. So 3.14 times 4 times 6.4 gives me 80.4. So now I have that surface area, and now I'm going to combine these. So 118 plus 80.4 gives me 198.4 meters squared. Okay, so now let's look at problem number 4. And I'm going to be doing this in pieces. So the first part, I'm going to find the surface area of the prism. So prism, the formula I'm going to use is the perimeter times the height plus the base. Now, I know the formula for a prism of a surface, or the surface area formula of a prism is perimeter height plus 2 times the base. But remember that we're covering one of the bases. We're covering this top base, so we only need one base, which is the bottom one. So the perimeter of the prism is 24. The height of the prism is 4. And the area of the base is 36. 24 times 4 plus 36 is 132 centimeters squared. So that is for the prism. Now for the pyramid. So for the pyramid, again, we don't need the base of the pyramid. So the formula that we're going to be using is 1/2 the perimeter of the base times the slant height. Okay, so if we do this, now we don't have the slant height for this problem, so we actually have to find the slant height. Now, what we need to know is what is the altitude of the pyramid, and if we know the distance from the bottom of the prism to the top of the pyramid is 12, I know the distance for the altitude would be 8. So imagine you have a right triangle where you have the altitude 8, and then half of 6 is 3, and we want to find the slant height. So the slant height, let me do it down here, is equal to the square root of 8 squared plus 3 squared. And that gives me 8.5. Okay, so now I have my formula. S is equal to 1/2. Now my perimeter is going to be 24, and my slant height is 8.5. So I end up getting 102. So now I combine both surface areas. 132 plus 102 gives me 234 centimeters squared. Okay, that completes lesson 19.3. And for your homework, we have problems where we have to find surface area of pyramids and cones, and then we have some composite figures for the checkpoint. So thank you guys. Have a good day.